Okay, it's being recorded. So welcome to the triage meeting. And I think this list is not complete. Oh, good. There you go, Scott. I think there are more names too. If you haven't put your name in here, put your name in here. And let's go down. So in terms of action items, we're actually doing pretty good. I pared this list down. There's still a few things not done. Scott and I have been working on this, and Ryan a little bit. I actually think Ryan did do this, but I left it unchecked just in case. I'm not sure what's going on with that, but people should follow up. So.
Oh, I did mine too. I just didn't check the box.
Oh, you did? Okay. When I looked, it didn't look like it had been done, but maybe you did it now, or maybe I missed it. Sounds
Likewise,
good.
I did it recently, so I would understand if you missed it.
Okay. Well, better, even better. All right. Awesome. So ad hoc project updates. So I wanted to find a better procedure for this, but we're doing our main check-ins in the once a month meeting, but just like you can nominate issues, if groups have things they want to bring up ad hoc, I think that's fine. So I scraped a few that have come up. One thing is there's a draft RFC for the declarative macro repetition count. I've read it over. I think it looks pretty good. I'm inclined to have them open it on the main RFC repo, but I wanted to get people's temperature if they want to take a look first or something else before I suggest that they do that.
You feel like it is ready to post and doesn't need any further direction checks first?
It seemed like what we asked for.
Okay.
And I think there's a draft implementation even. So yeah, I thought it was pretty okay. I mean, it doesn't mean we can't make changes when it's up on the repo. It just seemed like it was good enough. That was my impression. But
then in that case, yeah, I think we should tell them to do that.
Anyone have a concern about that? Okay.
I guess one thing I might mention, do we know if they're also interested in doing the implementation work, or we have a mentor lined up?
I believe it's already done.
Okay, great.
I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure I saw something about a draft implementation PR.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah. So inline assembly, Josh, you had mentioned this. Do you want to say this out loud?
Sure. Previously, we discussed whether this was ready for stabilization, and I checked with the group. There is a comment that I linked in the document that gives the list of what needs to happen first, and it gives here are the things that must happen before stabilization, and here are things we'd like to fix before stabilization. So I think that's an appropriate to-do list, and we should keep an eye on that, or rather that team will keep an eye on that and let us know when it's appropriate to try to stabilize.
That's awesome. Okay. Idiom lints, I just had a brief update that we're working on this document for discussion at the meeting that's scheduled further down the line. All right.
Is the plan still to post a PR for each proposed lint?
Yes, I think those PRs are mostly posted, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
But also, I guess one other point was there was some confusion around whether we would include all future compatibility warnings or just migrations. And my opinion is that future compatibility warnings are called that because we're not using an addition. We're breaking, we're making the change for all additions. And so they're not part of this process. We should probably be tracking those and closing them out on a timely basis, although I think that might be more compiler team's job, but although I'm not sure. But it's not part of the migration. It does, at least not by default. Maybe we might pick one and say, instead of doing a future compatibility, we want to do it as an addition change. That's fine. But,
there might be some value in making on the addition change to make someone be hard error on the addition change. It's just avoid further what do you call it, propagation of the
I mean, I think we
bad
should just
pattern.
make it a hard error everywhere. If we're gonna like, I would be okay with. Yeah, I think the default should be, if we're making it a future compatibility warning, then it should be denied by default everywhere and go to hard error. If we want to do it on an addition boundary, that's okay too. But it would be more the exceptional case.
Well, hang on a second though.
They don't start as denied by default, do they?
No, they start as warn.
So I realize the purpose of a future compatibility warnings is to declare this may be an issue in the future, but at the same time, when something was previously tied to an addition, as an example, the requirement to use dyn, then that seems like something that if we go back and say you can't use this even in 2015, then we've somewhat broken the original purpose of putting that in the 2018 edition and allowing people using 2015 to ignore it.
That's correct, but that's not a future compatibility warning. Or if it is, like
Okay.
the way I use the term at least, and I think it's a little confusing, so we should consider changing it or thinking about it, is these are soundness warnings.
I see. Okay. So you're not talking about we've deprecated this thing and would like to eventually remove it. You're talking about this is unsound and we are giving you a grace period because it kind of worked before.
Yeah, or like this was a bug.
Okay. I
That
think
we've
we should
decided to
clarify
fix.
that because I think the term future compatibility warning is used more broadly than that. And people talk about, oh, let's add a future compatibility warning for XYZ when it's not necessarily a soundness thing.
Right.
So we could clarify that if it is in regards to a soundness-based transition of we need to break this, but we need to give people time, then by all means, I do think we should fix it everywhere. But we don't want to imply that that's true for everything that somebody might refer to as a future compatibility warning.
Yeah, maybe we should call it a soundness bug warning or something, like something very specific. That would
I mean,
be
it's
There's
worth-
soundness. You did write soundness or bugs here. So the or bugs, I'm wondering if that includes like design bugs. I think we never intended to be okay, or no, that wasn't what you meant by or bugs.
I put that in there because sometimes we have used them for like, we're gonna change some detail of name resolution or something that's not
Yeah, I
really
think soundness is a little
soundness.
too specific because, yeah, like name resolution is one example. Another one is like adding trait impulse for like by value arrays, for example, implementing like into iterator, like things like that, where it's like we're going to break a lot of user code with an actual change. It's not directly soundness related, but it is something that's going to break user code and is within our like stability allowances.
I wonder if like stability warning. I don't know. Well, we can let's brainstorm a better name and branding off off
Anyway,
triage
I guess I'm still not quite understanding the art. Well, we can talk about this synchronous, maybe you and I, Nico. I just am not 100% convinced that if there's not some value in saying, look, addition boundary is a place where you know this is new code in some sense, either some migrating old code or it's just literally a new project. And there's, to me, I see some value in saying for new code, we can put in the stricter thing that we want anyway. It's only because of this backwards compatibility support that we have future compatibility warnings. That to me is the argument for why it makes some sense to tie a phased introduction, a phased shift with the addition boundary.
I certainly think we shouldn't have more than one mechanism by which we phase in breakage. We have one and people will understand it.
We might understand it.
Well, all right, let's talk about it after. I see your point, Felix. I mean, I'm thinking about like how we phased in NLL. Certainly additions are sometimes useful as a way to.
Yeah, that's a particular special case because we definitely leverage the addition there for various reasons. I don't know if it quite fits in all other cases, even though I'd love to claim it is an example of what I'm trying to argue for.
Well, yeah, but I
unfortunately,
mean,
I
part
can't-
of the
I
reason
can't
we
in good faith.
leveraged it was because it fixed a bunch of bugs, right? And we didn't want to break people's code, so we did.
I think we also leveraged it, in my opinion, to try to advertise the addition as being this amazing thing that'll let you do this awesome new thing. It was a promotional gimmick, in my opinion, as well. Maybe that's not fair.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. That's not how I saw it, but I saw it as strictly the fact that we knew the impact was high, and so we wanted to phase it in. But
Right. They're both
and we wanted
okay.
to get
Good.
the code tested, but doesn't
What
matter.
you said is certainly true. Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. Enough about this. Sorry.
We'll keep going. I'll come back to that then. We'll talk about a little bit. The main reason I bring this up is that there was a much longer list if we include all future compatibility warnings. But so, all right. Pending proposals. We've been talking about this deref patterns thing, and last time we talked about it, we said that we should exclude deref pure. There was a comment made to that effect, and I think the question I have is, or first up, the people in the thread asked how we feel about special casing particular types. In other words, like the compiler might very well just know that box is deref pure, which is how the borrow checker treats it, for example. I think it seemed like there was still interest in pursuing some work here, even if it doesn't work with all pointer types. Exhaustive, like if it doesn't integrate with exhaustiveness. How do people feel about that? I feel much better myself. Like having a deref pure that is really not designed, just works for stuff we in the standard library seems okay to me, but it is still opening some kind of door.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I feel mildly positive, but I also am wary. I think to some extent I would not want to open the door in the sense that I think that there is complexity that doesn't like doing it at all adds a significant amount of complexity compared to not doing it, regardless of what types are allowed. But I think I would personally be interested in seeing sort of how much complexity there is. And that really needs a proposal. So
Is it, I don't know if maybe this is too distracting, but box in particular, like already has a deref, an unstable deref pattern, right?
Yeah.
It seems to me like having the one special case for box is different from having a bunch of special cases in the standard library, because at that point it feels like it's getting implemented, it's just not getting stabilized.
Yeah, box is already special cased in the borrow checker too, and that's unstable. So there's a good argument for being like, we're already committed to special casing box or we're already committed to box either always being special cased or having some rationalization of it. But if we add additional impulse, it gets worse. We do have some precedent for that for standard though, right? Like, don't we allow it for self types or something like that? I think some of the pin stuff is specific too.
yeah, and coarse unsized.
Yeah.
Also, we have a precedent, I think, with like the May-Dangle attribute that's only available in STID, but it definitely adds special semantics for, making something more expressive for VEC and other collection types. So yeah. I think that's, this sounds similar to me.
I think what I'm saying is that I wouldn't want to like add a lang item for arc that makes arc work like this. It would be either box is special and nothing else is special, or there's some attribute or trait that just is not on a stabilization path yet.
Yeah, I would assume it would be the latter. But if I would, I agree with that.
Right, that's an implementation detail at that point, right?
Agreed.
Fair.
Yeah, okay, I'm on board with that.
The main thing is if we say that RC and ARC get this, like basically you would be adding an unstable deref pure that is not designed and has no stabilization path, and you would implement it for RC and ARC, and we are then committed to that we, either that it'll persist forever or that we come up with some like some rationalization of it, which I'm kind of okay with. But I guess I think in the long run it doesn't matter if we do box RC and ARC or just box. It's about the same complexity either way. So we could just start with box and like go from there. But
I guess my point is that we already did kind of start with box, right?
Yeah. Well, what I mean is it would work for, we would be extending it to work for other things that implement deref. It's just a matter of the exhaustiveness interactions. I guess there's a case for, do we even want this to work for things that don't handle, that aren't pure, but.
Would Vec be an instance of this, or am I misunderstanding this? Like where you could hypothetically deref a Vec to the slice within the pattern, or do we already support that?
I think that
Is there a
would
case for
just, I think Vec would just work in the sense of.
without?
Well, I mean, Vec would be something that could implement deref pure.
That's what I mean. That's what, okay. So it could be on the same list as RC and ARC the same way
Yeah.
here. Okay, yes. But that's not, we wouldn't necessarily commit to that right now. Okay.
It seems a heck of a lot more compelling if you can do it for a lot of types. I kind of don't see the point for just doing it for bugs. So it's a lot of work for almost no benefit.
On top of that, part of the point of this original proposal was to reduce the degree to which we have this special case mechanism for box that doesn't seem to ever be on a path to stabilization and isn't generalized to other things.
Yeah. All right, so I'm trying to look, what are the alternatives here? So it's basically limit to box, and what Taylor is pointing out is that this is basically the box pattern, right? There's some form of deref pure of perma unstable until RF seed, deref pure trait or attribute or something used by standard library types.
Yeah, I do think it might be worth noting that the box pattern, at least if I recall correctly, does give you like deref move in some sense, whereas I think for at least ARC and RC, it seems pretty unlikely that we would want that. And Vec, at least, also seems like there would be more work.
We won't have deref move to start if ever.
Maybe this is like a controversial suggestion, but if you have box syntax, meaning like in your head what is like the move form, it could be that we just are propagating that we have to already be in borrowing or borrowing mute modes due to match binding modes, right?
Sure. Yeah, I'm not saying that it wouldn't be feasible to do for box. I'm just saying that the box pattern as it stands today, if we just added it, would be more than what we were contemplating with the rest of the proposal, I think.
Yeah, that's correct. So I kind of lean towards, if we're going to do it, I think we should do some sort of perma unstable deref pure. Like we should cut out the attempt to design that, but but we can allow it as an implementation detail.
Does this push us back towards the only way to do this is with deref pure, or is this scoping it down to standard library types instead of?
I don't have a strong opinion about that. I think I would allow it for any type, but it only has the exhaustive semantics for standard library types for now.
That seems confusing to me, but.
So you're suggesting that you'd be able to do deref patterns for non-standard library traits, but that you would then have to have an underscore or similar because you can't guarantee exhaustiveness, but standard library types would be able to opt into saying, no, really, I can do exhaustive patterns.
Yeah.
That would be an improvement over the standard library types being the only ones who get deref patterns at all. If anyone can use deref patterns and we just don't yet stabilize the mechanism for saying, I am sufficiently pure that you can deref this and be exhaustive, that would be better.
I guess to contra me, that adds more complication in the sense that that's sort of adding more precedent for random code running during pattern matching and might be complex.
Yeah, I guess I would personally be pretty strongly against a proposal that requires us to do any sort of underscore pattern. It feels, I don't know, it feels like anything that does that implies complexity that I would rather not have.
You would rather see us not support deref patterns at all if that's a requirement?
Yeah.
I mean, we
Yeah,
could
I think
support
I-
them only for pure types, right? And then we
Right.
just
I guess
don't
there's
have a
a question
mechanism
of-
to define, we don't have a mechanism for users to define their own pure types at the moment.
Right, that's what I mean.
Sure. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that I am not sold that there's a need for us to add underscore patterns, and like I'm not sold that they actually solve anything, in the sense that I think you still have all of the same problems whether you require them or not. And ultimately it feels unclear to me that they provide enough benefit to have the cost of allowing sort of implicitly supporting the idea that deref pure is not in fact pure.
Right, like as a programmer, what do you put in that like it's always going to be underscore arrow unreachable or something, right? Like
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
underscore arrow assert false, or yes, fair.
So
Yeah.
I agree with you. I agree with
Well, like you used to have to do with integers.
I agree with this point though, that at first I thought I didn't quite agree because I thought, oh, from an implementation perspective, I don't think it's very complex, but that's not the point. Both, it's more that it backs up the idea that it sort of makes you be aware that deref could be non-pure, which would be nice if you don't have to think about. And it also does introduce this sort of running of user code that may have additional complications we haven't fully thought through. That is persuasive to me, and I don't think anyone's going to want to use it. I agree. It's going to be annoying. It seems easy to explain that it works only for stuff in the standard library.
Yeah,
because it's unstable and not yet finished.
and I guess my perspective is that if we really like quote unquote need an underscore pattern, I think that it would not be the end of the world for us to, you know, implementation wise, if you implement deref pure and for whatever reason we realize that it's not, to either just say that that's undefined behavior or to compile to like a, you know, unreachable instruction or whatever, that just aborts your program. So I don't know. I guess I'm not really convinced that underscores matter in some sense.
All right, so here's my proposal. Allow this to go forward, but or include and exclude. I don't know how best to phrase this, but basically exclude stability path for deref pure or attribute, and exclude types that aren't pure, but include, you know, pattern matching, sort of deref based pattern matching, or things in the standard library.
And we're also excluding deref move from this initial proposal, at least, correct?
Yes. That all seems, there's no reason we can't add any of those three things in the future, but not as part of this group effort.
You want this group to actually be in charge of trying to find the full set of things in standard library, or just start with a reasonable set and, you know, we'll fine tune it later?
The latter.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think it's especially hard, but yeah, I would assume that they'll be added over time.
I'm just saying it could be, it's a little ambiguous, the phrasing
Yeah.
of the include there in terms of whether you're expecting to do that work.
I would also call out that I think that like the match pattern binding modes stuff needs to be adjusted appropriately. I don't know, like
say more.
Like calling that out and saying like, I don't know like what happens if I try and, you know, match on an ampersand RC and then just give it the, you know, like a box of, or I say box the value or something, and then I get a, you know, the innards as just a plain shared reference.
I mean, you're asking stuff they have to figure out, right?
Yeah, this is just like what happens.
Yeah. Okay. I agree. That's part of the job. But go ahead and write some notes about specific things or leave it on the issue, one or the other.
Sure.
The charter issue. Okay, let's move on because we're taking longer, but that was useful. Oh, let me put an action item. I will say, I don't mind Nico to post this since I wrote up the proposal, unless someone else wants to. Scott, were you interacting with this group actually? You were. Sucker.
I think you should write up the proposal.
All right, fine. I probably shouldn't have called you a sucker and recorded.
Nico, I'm actually
Just
willing to do it.
But
I think I could do this, Nico, if you're too busy.
no, I don't think I'm too busy. Sorry.
Okay.
It's not. I don't think it's very long. Okay. So there's a. Oh right. There's a nominated RFC here. Add const ub RFC. I don't really know. Oops. I'm trying not to do that anymore. I don't really know why it's nominated. Probably because it's at some point. I asked Ali about it on Zulip. I don't think that he saw it yet. Does anyone know? If not, I propose we come back to it next week. All right, let's revisit it next week. We'll just leave it nominated for now. Ping Felix to request, since you volunteered yourself, to request a summary of why this is nominated.
Awesome.
So Tritrait version 2, Scott, I think the action item here is everyone should read this. Is that right?
That'd be great. Libs is having a meeting about it on Wednesday. I don't know if that will get it to the point where we would want to consider whether it's time to move forward from it, but having people read it would help us find that out.
Pretty sure, Josh, you already read it.
Yeah, I think the new version looks reasonable, and my expectation is that the primary point of discussion will be bike shedding names.
All right, let's move on. Change visibility scoping rules. So, right. So there's some exploration work here happening. This is the thing about introducing pub macro rules. I think the biggest unknown is, can we target this edition and how feasible are the migrations? There's a little bit of exploration work happening. I'm inclined to say we should merge the RFC and leave that as an unresolved question, assuming people are, in favor. I don't know if anyone has, if enough people have read it. I could summarize what it says. I could make an RFC bot FCP. I don't know.
I would propose that you use RFC bot for this. I would be in favor of merging this exactly as is and having the exact transition time being an open question whose primary determining factor is how quickly can we get this in.
I think now I'm realizing I'm not, tell me if you think I'm wrong, Josh. I'm 99% sure, should have written the summary from the text, that what's proposed here is add pub into all editions applied to macro rules.
Right.
This makes them behave like regular items, and then change the default behavior in edition N such that macro rules with no pub is a private item, like a regular item, and this requires migration. And the open question is, what is edition N, and can how well does the migration work? There's a few weird edge cases, or there's one weird edge case around recursive macros where people generate macros that generate helper macros and then rely on macro shadowing to disambiguate which helper macro they're invoking, because there'll be multiple with the same name. And I don't know that we have a workaround for that. I don't know that there's any correct way to write that in the new style. I think that is a kind of a potential blocker.
I see. You're
I-
not
I
talking
would-
about can we migrate that. You're talking about what do we expect people to replace it with, even if they hand migrate.
Yeah, I think it's quite possible that that's not something we have to be able to automatically manage, but I would like to be able to tell them what to do.
Sure.
And I don't know that we have an answer, and that's a bit of a problem.
It's also reasonable to ask, you can declare, like, should those behave like items in that regard, and that you can't shadow a name, or should there be a mechanism for shadowing?
I would be inclined to say if we were going to have some mechanism for shadowing, it would be something that applies to any item, ideally.
Right,
Uh,
exactly. If we were
then
going
we'd
to
have
have a
to define
shadow
it.
attribute or mechanism, it should apply to functions too.
Yeah, and the pattern might be something like making a submodule and using a pub use, for example. I don't know. Not sure if that actually works, but it might work. I haven't really thought about it. Anyway, so I guess the question is, given this summary and this open question, is it okay if I propose FCP, or does people want time to read it and think about it?
I am worried about the open question, especially around the recursive macros. The rest of them, I agree that they can be settled later.
So you'd like to see a pattern. If we had a pattern that works, would you consider that
Yes.
sufficient?
Yeah. I don't care about a migration. I think I care about either we say, you know, maybe there's a attribute or something you stick on macro rules that basically says I opt into the old behavior, and yes, shrug. Or, you know, maybe we can design something that actually does work with the new semantics.
Yeah, I accept that as a constraint. That's the one that makes me least comfortable. Why don't I'll talk to Ryan about it and see, and we can post it on the thread. I feel like there should be possibly an answer. I suspect the internet is clever enough to come up with it, but all right. Okay, Mark, you're doing the action items, right? I'm just assuming.
Yep.
Awesome, you rock. So PHI issues. Okay, there's this issue that was opened. RepRC is unsound on MSVC targets. I think
I can give a summary.
okay, because I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah. So my high level understanding, and there's actually I think a couple issues at this point that are similarly titled, is that there are some C compilers that have different rules for what structs and unions and enums and whatnot, like what their layout is. And so in theory, if you tag something RepRC in Rust, and then you use that C compiler, they will disagree, and you know that potentially causes sort of unsoundness to some extent. I mean, you have, you know, pointer cast or FFI of some kind probably, so it's unclear whether the RepRC is actually unsound.
So are you saying, like, for example, MSVC versus GNU?
Right. Yeah. Or potentially, my understanding is that even the C compilers don't agree. So like MSVC versus GNU or MSVC and Clang don't necessarily agree on all sort of esoteric definitions of structs and unions. And so there's not actually something we can match.
I believe that GCC and Clang can be made to agree with MSVC if you pass an attribute MS struct. So, but yes, there is disagreement between compilers on the layout of structures, and RepRC is supposed to match the default layout of the C compiler on the target so that you are able to interoperate. Whether you want to declare the unsoundness as being RepRC or the unsoundness as being the combination of RepRC and the mismatch and the use of extern C for interoperability, the net result is if we don't match, we're going to cause bugs.
Isn't the target triple supposed to sort of define?
It is.
This? Okay. Like
So
definitely the target triple.
The MSVC target and how it lays out structs.
Right, because the target triple is literally called MSVC, right?
That's correct.
So it seems like we should, if we just said we match MSVC, then the bug is arguably Clang, right?
using Clang
using
when
Clang with this target.
when calling an MSVC. Yeah, I guess that's true. I think one thing that I was not clear on based on the thread is whether there is potentially, obviously, if we change things, there's stability implications. I'm not clear to the extent to which we sort of know whether people are actually using this sort of thing, or if it's, you know, someone accidentally discovered it while reading the C spec or something.
Does it seem likely this is the domain of the compiler team to resolve this in terms of the target between the target triple issue or the potential for compiler flag being the right answer here?
I think this is really a compiler team issue.
So
Well,
Macro
there
has
is
an. Go ahead, Josh.
It's at the intersection, but
Sure. There is one specific aspect that I think is important for T-Lang to chime in on, and then we could absolutely punt the rest of it over to this is a bug in the compiler, please address it. The item that the Lang team needs to address and definitively state is what we intend the behavior of repr_c to be. The debate in the comments, and let's not get into the degree to which that debate has turned rather sour, but the debate is effectively, is repr_c a defined layout that applies everywhere, or is repr_c defined to be compatible with the target use of the C compiler for that target? And I believe the definition has always been the latter. repr_c interoperates with the default C compiler ABI on the target. And that is not quite what the Rust reference says, or at least the Rust reference could be interpreted differently, because it's trying to define what repr_c does without just punting to the target, and it is doing so incorrectly. So if we can, as the team, chime in and say repr_c means interoperate with the target C compiler's ABI for the platform, that will solve that immediate problem, and the rest of it can then be addressed as a compiler issue.
So I think it's interesting that there's stable standard library APIs whose documentation describes repr_c as being repr stable. And maybe that's just incorrect, and those examples should have said something else.
what do you mean by repr stable?
Sorry, in the thread they're talking about repr stable being the version of what layout extend, for example, says that in order to match C representation, you should call add to a line after blah, 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 because it's just the having something that doesn't change between Rust versions.
So I'm interested because
I think it's not appropriate to... Go on, Nico.
I was going to say that I would definitely have thought that repr_c means compatible with the target. Like it's defined by the target and the C compiler, and it's meant for interop, which also makes it stable for a given target, right? Because C
makes it
APIs
stable
don't change.
but not predictable.
Not necessarily universal across all targets, although I believe there is like a large degree of interoperability, in practice, but it's not defined to be interoperable. I'm wondering.
In fact, it's not interoperable between targets already today, and that can't really change, just because how it lays out a structure will depend on the alignment requirements of types on that platform. And for example, there are platforms that say that the alignment requirement for a 64-bit value is 64 bits, and platforms that say that the alignment requirement for a 64-bit value is 32 bits. So how structures are laid out will vary.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that seems like what I expected. What I'm wondering is what are the things where this feels like the kind of decision where you make it and then you find out later that there were other places where you were assuming the former. And I guess one example would be the standard lib documentation. I'm wondering if there have been other examples of like, oh, turns out sometimes I meant turns out I meant whichever definition was convenient for myself at the time when I talked before and I didn't realize it.
I think part of the problem here might be that if repr_c means as defined by the C standard, then the definitions are equivalent. But if it has to mean matches the implementation defined behavior of various different C compilers for things that are not allowed, then things get weirder.
So that certainly would raise issues, but I don't think that that's the issue at hand here, in that the portion in which this disagrees with MSVC is not something defined by the C specification. This is something intentionally left to
Right.
C implementations. ABI is not in the spec.
I just mean that the first example here is a zero size struct, which last I heard you can't actually do in C,
So
in standard C.
I think you might
It's an
actually be able
extension.
to in the latest C standard, but I don't know.
okay, it seems like we've covered the questions.
Well, there is actually one other question that has come up that isn't just repr C. There is also some issue of enum sizes and whether those enum should grow to fit, or whether you have to specify exactly what size they are and should match. So the struct layout aside, how big we allocate for an enum that is declared as repr C could also vary by platform. And I think that may also be appropriate. What would you get if you declared this enum in C? So
I
that's
believe there's
the third example in the opening post.
okay. Is that for an enum carrying data elements or a pure like a Rust?
No, a pure value enum, which is the only kind you can reasonably interoperate with C using.
Well, that last point is not exactly true because we have, but yes, we have. I mean, we have repr C defined on value given enums, and you precisely so that you can interoperate with C, but it's not that.
True, you
Like,
won't be matching the definition.
You're not matching
from
some native
C,
C
though.
thing. Yes, exactly.
Right. So that's
Um,
less of a concern. This is an enum that just has a discriminant and no values. So I
I'm not
think
really
we also
clear on
need to
why
make
this
it.
is a different. Like, I guess I also expect this to match the what C would do.
Well, I think there may be two answers on this one for what C would do. C may potentially error on this, or it may just overflow. Depending on the compiler, you may get a warning if you are building an enum with too large of a discriminant. But in this case, it sounds like it would just silently get bigger.
I remember, like, we put a lot of back in the day. This was a hot design topic, and I remember us, yeah, like the. Anyway, I'm sure we didn't investigate every compiler, but many of them grew, and that's why we had an explicit option to say the size, or else it was like big enough to fit or whatever. But all right. Well,
So
I guess let me ask a straw poll. Is anyone opposed to the definition of, or does anyone feel, yeah, I don't know, opposed is a strong word, but feel reluctant to say that repr C is defined to be compatible with the C compiler on the target?
The only minor hesitation I have is that I want a list of those C compilers to some extent, but beyond that, it seems reasonable.
Do we have to have like a -clang target, or is there any case where clang on is going to do something in MSVC?
To the best of my knowledge, clang determines its ABI based on target and is capable of interoperating with either. It is not intended to have its own ABI, so it either matches GCC or it matches MSVC.
So, one second. I was going to say, I think what we're really saying is not match the C compiler, but match the platform ABI definition, right? Which may be in practice defined by the C compiler, but in principle is independent.
We should say default CABI, by the way, because theoretically there may be a CABI for one compiler and for another compiler, or for two different calling conventions.
So, and Mark, you were saying basically you would like to see for each target a link to that default CIABI definition, or perhaps the compiler, the reference compiler we're trying to match, essentially.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like super exhaustive, but I guess my worry is that if we hand down in some sense this decision, I think a reasonable question is like, who decides, right? Like for some targets, it's in the name, but in some others, it's not. And potentially there's, open questions.
You're talking about what about a target that doesn't have the same kind of official status as MSVC, where there is one obvious compiler?
Sure. Yeah. Like, I don't know, maybe some ARM targets, maybe there's a proprietary tool chain that does one thing and 90% of people who use that target use that tool chain. And then there's Clang, and Clang does a different thing
Sure.
for whatever reason. And sort of it comes down to us or someone, right, to say, either we're
Yeah.
going with Clang or with that proprietary compiler potentially.
I think we should try to get answers to that. Like, it would be nice if we defined it,
Right.
at least for tier 1 and tier 2.
Yeah, there's a long tail, obviously.
Right. And Josh, that reminds me of the tier RFC, which side note.
Yes.
But okay, who wants to? Are
I'm
there other
actually
concerns?
already writing up a comment
Okay.
about this. So unless anybody has objections, then the summary I was going to make was repr C is intended to match the default CABI. If it doesn't, then that's a bug and should be fixed. And if the reference describes it differently, the reference should be fixed. And that we would like to see documentation for repr C linking to appropriate definitions for C structure layout ABIs.
Okay.
And then there's a feature request here to allow people to opt into an alternative, like, because it sounds like there's still the issue that Clang or that you need to be able to select between the two options in some cases.
Separately from, this is just a bug that we're not matching the default. Separately from that, there is an expressed desire by various people to have an equivalent of the MS struct or similar attribute where you'd be able to say, let's go match a different non-default ABI, but that would have to be proposed and RFC'd and similar.
Okay.
Would we, this is sort of the same as what you just said, but would we be interested in a ABI that is defined like the layout type in the standard library is defining it? Be like, it only looks at the size and the alignment of the fields and lays them out in definition order as a predictable layout?
As in something other than repr C, like a repr stable, effectively?
Yeah, apparently repr C looks at things other than just the size and the alignment of the fields. So I'm trying to figure out if some of these people wanted a repr that gives them a offsets that they can predict, or if they all wanted exactly matches C.
I wouldn't be opposed, but I would
platform.
sort of agree with the notion that that's an RFC.
Yeah, that would need an RFC. It's an interesting idea, but it would also need use cases for why do you need something that matches.
Right.
So to clarify that, that's something that if we were going to go that far, we might ask, is the purpose to build something that has the same ABI on all platforms? For example, whether U64 has 4-byte or 8-byte alignment, we lay out the structure always the same way so that you can serialize and deserialize it to a file across platforms. If we're going to go to the trouble of having a non-C stable ABI, it's possible that that ABI should match itself across all platforms as a desirable trait.
Yeah, so I would argue that should be a project proposal.
Yes.
Sounds like, yeah.
All right, sounds good. I think in terms of the reference, I guess it seems like the documentation can just be slightly weakened or something. But all right, let's see if we can get through. I didn't get to summarizing all of these. We've only got a few minutes left, but there was a proposal to deprecate weird nesting of items. I propose, like, meaning things, impls inside functions and so forth around the addition. I basically think we should just add a warning at some point, and we don't have to tie this to the addition. I don't want to put a lot of energy into this.
I think it won't happen for this edition.
That's kind of what I'm saying.
Timeline reasons. So
okay.
Maybe next edition, after we've had a warning about it, we could consider it again. But practically, I think the change is big enough that it won't happen for this edition.
I do think there's, I guess I guess I would say we could add a warning. I wouldn't mind having a RFC, like either an RFC or at least an FCP on whether to do so, because it is kind of a useful pattern that is widely used, I think. Not super widely, but widely, and maybe the right word is not widely, but deeply. Like some people use it a lot.
I think there's a bunch of good conversation in the issue about here's the patterns that people do use that are useful that we should keep.
Mhm.
And perhaps the warning would be a good way to determine whether we've correctly identified the set of things that people want to keep doing.
Mm.
Like the weirdest ones of an inherent impl for a struct defined not inside a function, but the inherent impl is inside a function.
That doesn't seem very.
Nobody was like, oh yes, clearly I do that all the time.
No, it's more about structs that are defined in functions
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And I guess, yeah, okay.
Taylor had a good point about like it's sort of coherence at scopes or something.
Right.
The analogy isn't perfect, but I like it.
So our basically suggestion is someone can propose a lint and we can discuss. That sound right?
That sounds right.
Sounds good.
Do we need to split our tag for additions to move this to the next one somehow? Or is the milestone for additions good enough?
I don't know. Worry about that offline. Okay. Unsafe up. There's no action item here. This is an FCP. I think also there's no action item here. This is just needs to be unnominated. Maybe I already did it. This is we already agreed we want unsafety checking to work lexically, and we're just working on the implementation. Allow qualified paths in struct construction RFC or PR 8080. 880, sorry. Rylev. Has anyone looked much at this? Looks like Mark, you've commented on it.
Ryan typed up the summary we were asking for like 3 weeks or more ago now, and then it got lost for a while. There's a comment on January 14th. I can paste a link to it, I guess. Okay, you got it.
No, I put the wrong one. There's a better one, it looks like. Yeah, so.
Yeah, it seems pretty unambiguous to me in terms of what is being asked for. That this seems desirable, but
yep.
I don't know. I guess maybe we should just have FCP merge.
I was going to say someone should FCP merge, I think, and we can. Do you want to do that? Oh, you can't do that, Mark. Who wants to do FCP merge?
I'll do that, sure.
It's allow specifying alignment for functions. What happened with this? We talked about this another time. It seemed reasonable. We discussed adding a feature gate. And then we'll need a tracking issue. I think we kind of can just you probably want to FCP merge this with those conditions based on what we commented last time.
If it's just unstable, do we need an FCP merge? I feel like we can just unnominate.
Concur.
I'm okay with it, given that we're all in this meeting right now.
I was going to say, do we feel comfortable that it will not just kind of stagnate because we haven't given a definitive answer if we don't FCP?
I'd rather we FCP merge, but I think that's the right thing to do. But I'm okay with checking all the boxes right away because I think we're all in this meeting. But
that seems almost all of us. Taylor had to leave.
Oh, Taylor had to leave.
But I think we could check the boxes.
Check everyone who's in here. Josh, can you do that?
Sure.
FCP for it to go in unstable, and then it'll immediately start.
Unstable, right? Oh yeah, it'll immediately start, right?
Sure.
It just seems right. I think we should have a formal decision before we add random features. Update, Bert, we're gonna stop. We almost got all the way. Pretty cool. Next time we'll surely do it. Thanks, y'all. See you next time. Oh, yeah. See you tomorrow, perhaps. I sent out some notes about discussion agenda, but there you have it.
Bye.